Before we go any further, there is something you need to understand, because what is unfolding right now is far more significant than most people realize. For days, perhaps even weeks, there has been a subtle pressure building beneath the surface, a feeling that something unseen has been moving through the background of your life. Maybe you could not identify it. Maybe you tried to ignore it. Yet the sensation remained, growing stronger with every passing day. Now, on Wednesday, June 24th, that hidden momentum reaches a critical point as the moon enters Scorpio. At first glance, this may appear to be another ordinary lunar transit, another routine movement through the zodiac. But I do not believe that is what this is. What opens between June 24th and June 26th carries a level of intensity that stands apart from the rest of the year. This is not a passing emotional fluctuation that fades as quickly as it arrives. What emerges during this period is likely to remain visible long after the window itself has closed. Once certain truths reveal themselves, they cannot simply be tucked away again. The reason for this heightened intensity becomes clearer when you look at what is happening around the Scorpio moon. During these 3 days, 3 major planetary alignments activate one after another with remarkable precision. The Sun forms a trine to the North Node. Venus forms a trine to Saturn. Then, in rapid succession, the Sun encounters a square to Neptune and a quincunx to Pluto, with those 2 aspects occurring within roughly 15 hours of each other. Consider for a moment how much astrological activity is being compressed into such a narrow span of time. The atmosphere becomes charged, the pressure accumulates, and if you have recently felt restless, emotionally unsettled, or unable to shake the sense that something important is approaching, there is a reason for that sensation. What you are feeling is not appearing out of nowhere. It is connected directly to the celestial mechanics unfolding above. But before we explore those alignments individually, it is essential to understand why this particular Scorpio moon carries so much weight. Without that context, the events of the coming days may seem random. With that context, however, an entirely different picture begins to emerge. This is not simply about shifting emotions. It is about revelation. It is about what becomes impossible to ignore. At this moment, the Sun is traveling through Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the Moon. Meanwhile, Venus is moving through Leo, and Leo is ruled by the Sun. In other words, Venus reports to the Sun, and the Sun reports to the Moon. There is a chain of energetic authority taking place. When the Moon enters Scorpio, that chain funnels directly into Scorpio's influence. Suddenly, themes connected to identity, personal values, emotional needs, relationships, trust, security, and self-worth become filtered through one of the most penetrating signs in the zodiac. And Scorpio is not interested in appearances. It has never been satisfied with what is visible on the surface. Scorpio seeks what exists underneath. It governs hidden motivations, psychological complexity, shared resources, unspoken power struggles, buried emotions, and secrets that have remained concealed for long periods of time. When the moon occupies this sign, it behaves almost like a detective entering a room that everyone else overlooked. It begins opening drawers. It starts examining forgotten corners. It asks uncomfortable questions. The polished story loses its power. The deeper truth becomes the focus. What makes this transit even more compelling is the condition of Mercury. Mercury is preparing to station retrograde on June 29th, only 3 days after this Scorpio moon window concludes. As Mercury approaches that station point, its movement slows dramatically. During this entire period, Mercury is moving through Cancer at a pace far slower than usual. Astrologically, this matters because when Mercury decelerates, information that seemed lost often finds its way back into awareness. Old conversations suddenly make sense. Forgotten details return. Memories that appeared irrelevant reveal new significance. Pieces of the puzzle begin reconnecting. That is why I do not believe the revelations of the next 3 days will necessarily involve completely new information. Instead, many of the truths emerging now may be things that have existed all along. They were present. They were available. Yet something prevented you from recognizing them clearly. Perhaps emotional attachment obscured them. Perhaps timing was not right. Perhaps you simply were not ready to see what was there. Whatever the reason, the fog begins lifting now, and that can be both empowering and unsettling at the same time. Think about your own experience recently. Have memories resurfaced unexpectedly? Have people from the past appeared in your thoughts for no obvious reason? Have old situations suddenly demanded your attention again? If so, there is a strong possibility that this process has already begun. Mercury's shadow phase often operates long before the official retrograde begins. It quietly retrieves information from the past and places it back in front of us. Then the Scorpio Moon arrives and directs an intense beam of awareness toward whatever has been uncovered. What was hidden becomes difficult to overlook. This brings us to the next phase of the story. Over this extraordinary 3-day period, I believe 3 specific truths are preparing to reveal themselves through the planetary alignments unfolding in real time. These are not abstract possibilities detached from the astrology. They emerge directly from the exact aspects activating between June 24th and June 26th. Each alignment contributes another layer to the unfolding picture. Each revelation builds upon the one before it. By the time this sequence reaches its conclusion, the emotional and psychological landscape may look very different from the one you are standing in today. Patterns you once accepted may suddenly feel restrictive. Choices you believed were safe may reveal hidden costs. And it all begins with the first major alignment that arrives only hours after the moon enters Scorpio. On June 24th, the Sun at 2 degrees Cancer forms an exact trine to the North Node at 2 degrees Pisces. What makes this aspect so intriguing is that trines are traditionally associated with ease, flow, and harmony. Yet this particular trine may carry far more significance than its gentle reputation suggests. What makes this first revelation so powerful is not the presence of conflict, but the complete absence of it. Most people expect destiny to announce itself through struggle, obstacles, and dramatic resistance. They assume that if something truly belongs to them, there must be a mountain to climb before they can reach it. Yet the alignment unfolding between the Sun and the North Node tells a very different story. The energy moves without friction. It flows without obstruction. And for many people, that realization may be far more uncomfortable than encountering a barrier. The North Node represents the direction of growth, the territory your soul is attempting to enter, the experiences that pull you toward your future evolution. Across from it stands the South Node in Virgo, the familiar landscape of old habits, established routines, and psychological safety nets. It is the place you return to when uncertainty feels overwhelming. It is the voice that prefers what is known over what is possible. As the Sun, at 2 degrees Cancer, forms its exact trine to the North Node. At 2 degrees Pisces, on June 24th, something remarkable becomes visible. The pathway forward is not blocked. It is not hidden. It is not waiting for some future moment to appear. It has already been available. The opening has existed longer than you may want to admit, and that is where the discomfort begins. Because if the road has been accessible all along, then perhaps the greatest obstacle was never external. Perhaps the delay was not caused by circumstances, timing, or other people. Perhaps the hesitation originated somewhere much closer. This is the kind of realization the Scorpio Moon refuses to let you avoid. Scorpio does not tolerate self-deception. It has an extraordinary ability to expose the difference between what we tell ourselves and what we actually know deep inside. Under its influence, rationalizations begin to lose their strength. The stories you have repeated to justify waiting start sounding less convincing. Suddenly you become aware of the gap between what you say you want and what you are actually willing to pursue. The North Node in Pisces asks for something many people find difficult. It asks for trust, not blind trust, but trust in the quiet inner, knowing that cannot always be explained logically. It asks you to release the need to control every outcome before taking a step forward. It invites you to stop demanding certainty before allowing movement. Meanwhile, the South Node in Virgo continues whispering familiar concerns. What if you miss something? What if the timing is wrong? What if you are not prepared enough? What if there is still another detail to analyze before making a decision? These questions often appear responsible on the surface, yet beneath them, there can be a deeper fear of stepping beyond what feels safe. This is why the emotional atmosphere of this transit may feel so intense. You may notice it appearing in subtle ways. Perhaps there is a persistent tension that surfaces whenever you think about a particular decision. Perhaps a certain opportunity keeps returning to your thoughts, no matter how many times you push it aside. Perhaps there is a dream, a conversation, a commitment, or a change you already know you need to make, yet something continues delaying the moment of action. The Scorpio Moon shines directly into those places. It reveals what has been sitting beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. And it is important to understand something. This is not punishment. It is not the universe criticizing you for moving too slowly. It is a moment of recognition. A moment when you begin to see that the exhaustion you have been carrying may not have come from the journey itself. It may have come from standing at the threshold while convincing yourself the door was locked. The deeper truth emerging here is that growth has been available. What remained unavailable was your willingness to fully claim it. If there is something you have postponed, despite knowing it aligns with your deeper truth, this transit may bring you face to face with that reality. The luxury of avoidance begins to disappear, yet hidden inside that discomfort is freedom. Because once you recognize what is real, you no longer have to spend energy maintaining excuses that no longer fit. And that realization prepares the ground for the second major truth that arrives as the story continues to unfold. On June 25th, another significant alignment takes center stage. Venus at 13 degrees Leo forms an exact trine to Saturn at 13 degrees Aries. While the previous aspect focused on personal direction, this one begins illuminating the foundations beneath relationships, commitments, and financial structures. And I believe many people will be surprised by what becomes visible. Venus in Leo is expressive by nature. It enjoys demonstrations of affection, loyalty, admiration, and heartfelt devotion. It appreciates visible signs of care and recognition. There is warmth in its energy, a desire to celebrate connection openly and generously. Yet Saturn in Aries operates from a very different place. Saturn is not interested in appearances. It is concerned with substance. It evaluates consistency. It examines accountability. It asks whether actions align with declarations. It wants evidence rather than promises. When these two planets connect through a harmonious trine, they create an environment where authenticity becomes impossible to ignore. And because this occurs beneath the penetrating gaze of the Scorpio Moon, the process becomes even more revealing. Scorpio notices what others overlook. It detects inconsistencies. It senses what exists beneath polished presentations. It has little interest in surface impressions when deeper truths are available. As a result, many people may begin seeing their relationships and commitments through a new lens. Connections that possess genuine strength become easier to recognize. Their foundation reveals itself through reliability, effort, and follow-through. At the same time, situations that have been sustained primarily through appearances may become harder to justify. The contrast grows clearer. The difference between words and actions becomes impossible to miss. Perhaps you have already sensed this shift developing. Maybe there is a relationship, where the promises sound reassuring, yet the behavior tells a different story. Maybe there is a partnership that appears stable from the outside, while something underneath feels incomplete. Maybe there is a financial arrangement that looks secure on paper but leaves you questioning its long-term reality. These observations are not emerging randomly. They reflect the exact themes this alignment is designed to expose, and this extends far beyond romance. Friendships, business relationships, collaborations, financial commitments, and personal agreements can all come under the spotlight. Wherever there is a gap between what has been expressed and what has actually been demonstrated, Saturn draws attention to it. Venus ensures you care enough to notice it. Scorpio ensures you cannot unsee it once it becomes visible. Yet despite how revealing this process may be, there is another side to this alignment, and in many ways it may be the most important part of the entire story. Yet there is another dimension to the Venus and Saturn trine that deserves just as much attention, because this alignment is not only exposing weaknesses, it is also revealing strength. While much of the focus naturally falls on the cracks, the inconsistencies, and the places where promises have failed to become reality, this transit also highlights the foundations that have quietly proven themselves over time. In fact, some of the most important realizations during this period may have nothing to do with what is falling apart, and everything to do with what has been holding steady all along. Think about the people who have remained present when there was no audience watching. The individuals who continued showing up through ordinary days, difficult conversations, and moments that offered no recognition or reward. These are not necessarily the loudest voices in your life. Often, they are the ones whose loyalty became so familiar that it faded into the background. Under the influence of Venus at 13 degrees Leo forming an exact trine to Saturn at 13 degrees Aries, those connections become impossible to overlook. The Scorpio Moon directs your attention toward what has genuine substance beneath the surface. Suddenly, you begin recognizing who has consistently matched words with action, who has demonstrated commitment rather than merely talking about it, and who has chosen reliability even when it required effort. For many people, this realization may arrive with a surprising mixture of gratitude and regret. Gratitude because they finally recognize the value of what has been supporting them. Regret because they may realize they underestimated it. It is easy to become captivated by dramatic displays, grand promises, and emotional intensity. It is much harder to appreciate quiet consistency while it is happening. Yet this transit shifts the focus toward what actually lasts. At its core, the lesson emerging from this alignment is simple but profound. Genuine love, authentic commitment, and lasting value are not measured solely by feelings. They are measured by choices repeated over time. They are demonstrated through actions, responsibilities honored, promises fulfilled, and efforts sustained. Saturn in Aries demands courage because commitment itself requires courage. It asks whether you are willing to prove your priorities through behavior rather than declarations. It challenges you to examine whether your actions reflect what you claim matters most. Wherever that alignment is missing, the Scorpio Moon exposes it. Wherever there is a disconnect between intention and execution, the gap becomes visible. And because Scorpio works emotionally rather than intellectually, these realizations are not likely to remain abstract concepts. You feel them, you experience them. They register somewhere deeper than logic. The same principle extends into financial matters. Any area built upon excitement without structure, speculation without foundation, or image without practical value may begin revealing its weaknesses. Decisions driven primarily by ego, appearances, or temporary enthusiasm become harder to justify. What once seemed convincing may suddenly feel unstable. What once appeared secure may reveal vulnerabilities that were overlooked before. And once again, the Scorpio Moon refuses to let those observations remain theoretical. It brings them directly into your awareness. Although this process may feel uncomfortable, there is something profoundly freeing about it. Clarity liberates energy. The moment you stop investing yourself in illusions, you reclaim resources that were previously scattered. You stop chasing what was never sustainable. You stop defending what was never solid. You stop carrying responsibilities that were never truly yours. And in that moment, something remarkable happens. The confusion begins to dissolve. The unnecessary weight starts falling away. The difference between what is real and what is merely performative becomes unmistakable. That is why this transit feels less like a loss and more like a correction. It redirects your attention toward what deserves your energy and away from what does not. It reminds you that strength is often quieter than spectacle. It reminds you that value is measured through consistency rather than appearances. And once that realization settles in, the stage is set for the most intense chapter of this entire sequence. Because if the first revelation exposed where you have been holding yourself back, and the second revealed what possesses genuine integrity, the third moves into even deeper territory. This is where perception itself becomes the subject of examination. This is where the window reaches maximum intensity. The turning point begins on June 25th at 6:40 in the evening, when the Sun at 4 degrees Cancer forms a square to Neptune at 4 degrees Aries. Then, less than 15 hours later, on June 26th, the Sun at 4 degrees Cancer forms a quincunx to Pluto at 4 degrees Aquarius. Taken together, these two alignments create a sequence that is exceptionally revealing. One aspect dissolves illusions. The other exposes what remains after those illusions disappear. The result can be startling. To understand why, it helps to look at Neptune first. Neptune governs dreams, ideals, imagination, spirituality, and transcendence. Yet Neptune also rules confusion, distortion, wishful thinking, and the tendency to see what we hope is true rather than what actually exists. When the Sun forms a square to Neptune, perception becomes the battleground. A tension emerges between reality and interpretation. It can feel as though a veil is suddenly pulled away from something you thought you understood. The Sun in Cancer seeks emotional security. It wants to nurture what it loves. It wants reassurance that the people, situations, and stories surrounding it can be trusted. Neptune in Aries introduces a different dynamic. It can inspire a powerful belief in a mission, a cause, a relationship, or a vision. It creates conviction. It generates passion. Yet at the same time, it can blur important details. It can make someone feel so committed to an idea that they stop questioning whether their perception is accurate. Under the investigative gaze of the Scorpio Moon, that fog begins to thin. What was once difficult to see becomes visible. What was once assumed becomes questionable. And for many people, the experience may arrive suddenly. A relationship that seems secure may reveal hidden inconsistencies. A career direction that felt unquestionably right may begin raising concerns. A belief that helped define identity may no longer withstand scrutiny. The realization can be deeply emotional because it challenges not only what you believed, but also why you believed it. One of the most difficult aspects of this process is the tendency to turn inward and blame yourself. When clarity arrives, people often ask painful questions. How did I miss this? Why did I trust it? Why did I not recognize the signs earlier? Yet these questions overlook the nature of Neptune itself. Neptune rarely deceives through obvious falsehoods. Instead, it wraps reality in a version that feels meaningful, beautiful, hopeful, or emotionally satisfying. It speaks directly to what the heart longs to experience. That is why its influence can be so convincing. The important point is not that the illusion existed. The important point is what happens once it is revealed. Because seeing clearly changes everything. The real danger is not having been uncertain before. The real danger is refusing to acknowledge what has become visible now. And if the Neptune square begins the process by dissolving illusions, the next aspect intensifies it dramatically. Less than 15 hours later, the Sun forms its quincunx to Pluto. This introduces an entirely different force. Neptune softens boundaries and obscures distinctions. Pluto uncovers what has been hidden. Neptune blurs. Pluto penetrates. Neptune creates uncertainty. Pluto demands confrontation. And because a quincunx connects energies that struggle to understand one another, the discomfort generated by this aspect can be impossible to ignore. It forces an adjustment. It forces awareness. It forces you to look directly at something that no longer fits the story you have been telling yourself. And that is where the deepest revelation of this entire window begins to emerge. What makes this Pluto activation so significant is the fact that the two signs involved are operating from completely different realities. Cancer and Aquarius do not naturally understand one another. They are built on different priorities, different instincts, and different ways of navigating the world. There is no easy bridge between them. So when the Sun in Cancer forms a quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius, the result is not a smooth conversation. It is pressure. Persistent pressure. The kind that keeps returning until you finally acknowledge what has been sitting beneath the surface all along. And what emerges during this moment may be one of the most important realizations of the entire window. Hidden influences begin revealing themselves. Not necessarily dramatic conspiracies or obvious forms of control, but the subtle forces that have been shaping decisions, emotions, and behaviors without attracting much attention. You may suddenly become aware of where your authority has been leaking away. Perhaps it has been happening through a relationship that gradually taught you to silence parts of yourself. Perhaps it has been happening through a workplace where compromises became so routine that you stopped noticing how much of yourself you were sacrificing. Perhaps it has been happening through habits and patterns that convinced you someone else's needs should always come before your own. Pluto in Aquarius brings collective systems into focus. Aquarius governs networks, technology, algorithms, social structures, and the large-scale framework that influence modern life. Pluto magnifies whatever it touches, exposing the deeper mechanics operating underneath appearances. Meanwhile, the Sun in Cancer represents something profoundly personal. It represents your emotional reality, your need for safety, your connection to family, belonging, and the intimate parts of life that cannot be reduced to data or systems. When these energies collide through a quincunx, a profound tension becomes visible. It is the tension between what nourishes your humanity and the structures that increasingly shape your everyday existence. You begin noticing where efficiency has replaced authenticity. You begin noticing where external expectations have become louder than your own inner voice. Most importantly, you begin noticing where you have surrendered decision-making power without fully realizing it. Because the Scorpio Moon is amplifying this entire sequence, the emotional impact becomes impossible to ignore. Pluto is Scorpio's modern ruler, which means every realization arrives with additional intensity. These are not likely to feel like casual observations that pass through your mind and disappear. They feel deeper than that. They feel like something fundamental shifting, like discovering that a foundation you trusted contains cracks you never noticed before, like standing in familiar territory and suddenly realizing it is not as familiar as you thought. Yet there is something essential to remember during this process. The revelation itself is not the threat. The hidden condition was the threat. The exposure is not what creates the problem. It simply reveals the problem that was already there. And although truth can be uncomfortable when it first arrives, truth also creates options. The moment you see clearly, you gain the ability to respond differently. You gain the ability to make choices that were impossible while the situation remained hidden. That is why this transit, despite its intensity, carries enormous potential for liberation. Once awareness arrives, it cannot be undone. Once the illusion dissolves, you cannot return to believing it was reality. And while that may initially feel destabilizing, it is also the beginning of genuine empowerment. There is another aspect of this window that I believe deserves attention, because many people may notice these energies expressing themselves physically as much as emotionally. The Scorpio moon has long been associated with powerful bodily responses. During periods like this, sleep patterns can become irregular. Some people notice tension accumulating in the jaw, shoulders, or lower back. Others describe a sensation of heaviness that seems disconnected from any obvious cause. There can be moments when emotions register physically before the mind fully understands what is happening. At the same time, Mercury is moving extremely slowly through Cancer as it approaches its retrograde station on June 29th. Because this station occurs only 3 days after the Scorpio moon period concludes, Mercury is already operating differently. Thoughts may arrive in waves rather than in orderly sequences. Memories may surface unexpectedly. Conversations from years ago may suddenly return with remarkable emotional clarity. Events you believe were resolved may reappear in your awareness carrying meanings you never recognized before. I do not see this as random mental activity. It feels much more like a retrieval process. Mercury's shadow phase often functions like an archive being reopened. Information that was stored away begins moving back into conscious awareness. Experiences that once seemed insignificant reveal hidden relevance. Old memories return, not because the past is repeating itself, but because you are finally prepared to understand them from a different perspective. If you have been feeling unusually exhausted lately, there may be a reason for that. If your dreams have become vivid, emotionally charged, or strangely familiar, there may be a reason for that as well. It can feel as though your system is preparing itself before the main revelation arrives. The processing begins early. The emotional groundwork is laid in advance. Your mind and body start integrating information before your conscious awareness catches up. Because of this, forcing yourself forward may not be the most productive response. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is listen. If your energy is asking for rest, honor it. If your body is encouraging you to slow down, consider that possibility seriously. There are moments when physical wisdom recognizes a shift before the rational mind has words for it. This may be one of those moments. Then, on Friday, June 26th at 2:40 in the afternoon, the atmosphere changes dramatically. The moon leaves Scorpio and enters Sagittarius. The difference may feel immediate. The intensity begins loosening its grip. The emotional excavation that has dominated the previous 72 hours starts coming to an end. Instead of digging deeper, attention turns toward perspective. Sagittarius approaches life differently. Where Scorpio investigates, Sagittarius seeks meaning. Where Scorpio uncovers hidden material, Sagittarius asks what that material teaches. The focus shifts away from revelation and toward interpretation. The question is no longer what was exposed. The question becomes what you will do with what you now know. This is where the deeper gift of the entire transit sequence reveals itself. The truths that emerge during these 72 hours are not appearing to punish you. They are not appearing to take something away. They are appearing to redirect you. Whether the revelations involved your life path, your relationships, your finances, or your personal power, each one serves the same purpose. They help align you with reality rather than illusion. And when you reach the other side of this window, I believe many people will discover that they are standing on far more stable ground than before. Certain fantasies may have disappeared. Certain assumptions may no longer survive scrutiny. Certain performances may have lost their ability to convince. Yet what remains possesses something far more valuable. It possesses authenticity. Perhaps what remains will look smaller than what you once imagined. Perhaps it will appear simpler. Perhaps it will lack some of the drama that once captured your attention. But it will be real. And in the long run, reality provides a stronger foundation than any illusion ever could. As we close this discussion, I want to thank you for staying through this entire journey. These are complex energies, and there was a great deal to unpack. If any part of this resonated with your own experience, I would love to hear what has been unfolding in your world. What themes have been surfacing? What realizations have been finding their way into your awareness? What shifts have you noticed leading up to this period? Please share your thoughts below, because these conversations often reveal how many people are moving through similar experiences at the same time. Take care of yourself as these energies continue unfolding over the next few days. Be patient with the process. Trust what is being revealed. And I look forward to connecting with you again very soon in the next video.